The US and Iran finished talks in Switzerland after signing a memorandum of understanding. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer resigns, and there has been yet another deadly anti-Semitic attack. This is The Deep Dive. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm Shifra Jacobs, and I'm filling in once again for Jacob Lasnik. This week had some intense moments as the US and Iran continued talks. This means there's an official pause on the war that started February 28. Anti-Semitism also surged across multiple continents this week, including the deadly attack in Montreal. Thank you so much for joining me, and it is so fun that we're finally one-on-one in the studio together. After all of those episodes we filmed during the war.
Right. And then I was abroad for 3 months, which was an interesting time.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Every week it's chaotic. This week, monumental things did happen. But before we even go into US and Iran, I want to talk a little bit about Lebanon, Hezbollah. It's been really in the headlines this week. We had it was an editorial, right?
Our editorial from today, actually, we're filming this on Wednesday. So Wednesday morning, we put out the editorial that was written by our editorial staff, and it basically highlights how Israel's essentially going to lose autonomy with dealing with the Hezbollah threat on the northern border. And if you've ever, if our viewers or listeners have ever been there and ever seen what's really there, it's really important to kind of understand the geography just a little bit, because when you're thinking about the Hamas threat, right, they are not really higher up. They're either lower down or roughly on the same sort of terrain. So they have to fire, rockets high up to kind of get anything. They can fire some mortars, but, past that, it's not really much. It's still a threat, but it's not to the same level.
Relative.
Hezbollah, it is an extremely mountainous region. There are various kibbutzim up there. That there are Hezbollah positions, at least there were the time that I was there, which was just after a few months after October 7th, so they hadn't had the people operation or the wars or anything there yet. But some of the Hezbollah positions are literally looking down into kibbutzim there. Now, some of these areas have been cleared and are a lot safer and whatever. But if Israel loses the ability to go into those areas and handle those threats, which are threats that have not been handled by UNIFIL. The Lebanese army is really struggling to put a handle to get a grip on Hezbollah.
And there's also been evidence found that October 7th-like plans were in some sort of process, whenever that time would have been, and there's different reports on when or whatever, from the north and from the threat of Hezbollah, which also is, it feels almost imminent, even though, I don't want to say that it is, but,
Well, this is the thing that I think is also being missed by people. This isn't actually new. If anyone has heard of the Almas Education and Research Center run by Lieutenant Colonel, I believe is her exact rank in reserves. Apologies if I've got that slightly wrong, but Sarit Zahavi, really worth looking up, because
we had her on a podcast.
We did. We've had her on a podcast. She writes also for Defense and Tech, the Defense and Tech section occasionally. She has covered this for a very long time, and this is not new. This threat of going into these areas is a threat that has existed, I believe, roughly since, at the latest in my mind, is 2014, maybe 2012, something around that. But there was a news broadcast, I think it was Al Mayadeen or Al Manar, one of the affiliated to Hezbollah news outlets in Lebanon, that broadcasted an animated set of plans of what was going to happen. That there was going to be a barrage of rocket fire into this region, that they were then going to go through various tunnels that they had already got, or they were then going to go in by sea or go in by land. These plans are not new. Hezbollah has been planning this for a long time. And what's more concerning is when you look at these plans, they are so similar to October 7th. So weirdly, it's almost like a cyclical thing. Yeah. The plans that existed originally in Lebanon, then were used by Hezbollah in Gaza, but Hamas rather in Gaza. And now we're kind of going sort of back up a bit to Hezbollah, who could potentially use the same plan. And then if you add to that the possibility that Israel literally cannot respond because of the fact that there is this weird security mechanism that somehow Iran is going to have control and say over.
I feel like we need to go deeper into that, because
Absolutely.
It's just I feel a little bit confused as well. And obviously we have we have limited information in the sense of, Israel wasn't in the room. And if we kind of bring it back a little bit and we kind of, paint the picture, Iran and the US are having talks. Obviously, Hezbollah, well, they finished their talks, but Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran.
Yep.
The conversation of Lebanon and Israel happened in that room, but Israel was not a participant in those conversations. So from Israel's perspective, it's slightly confusing. But then it's also, how do they even plan to put these mechanisms in place? What is that even supposed to look like? What are we supposed to expect? What does it mean if Hezbollah attacks first, or Israel does something preemptive, or Israel attacks first? There's so many, it's so fragile anyway. So I don't know how this could work.
It feels like it's very much set up for failure in multiple different ways. One of the ways that I keep thinking of that I think less people are talking about than they should be, and fair enough, because I think Lebanon has kind of been perceived as now a failed state because of what happened, especially with the port explosion a few years back, that really kind of showed how much the country is really struggling with sectarianism and other problems within society. But we saw this news report in recent weeks, I believe it was a week or two ago, from the president of Lebanon, who spoke to CNN and basically said to Iran and Hezbollah, this is not your country. He was subtly kind of saying it to Israel as well. There was a subtlety there as well. But it's true. It's not Israel's country. It's not Hezbollah's country. It's not Iran's country. It's the Lebanese people's country. And at the end of the day, the Lebanese state needs to be able to deal with its own security problems. And the question that I basically am asking about this whole thing is, if you're signing security guarantee decisions on another country that has a semi-functioning government, still unclear exactly how much Lebanon as a state functions, but they have the basics of what they should have, which means you can't really make a decision for them and kind of go, oh, well, we're letting this Iran decide on your behalf what's going to happen in your country. But then that's the same for Israel. It's the same for us, because Israel has never really let other countries decide its security on its behalf. It's never allowed that. But then you're sort of seeing now, there's been this very weird, and I'm going slightly off topic, but there's been this very weird thing where Israel has kind of outsourced a little bit of its security to America. In recent years, when Trump came in, there's been this subtlety coming from the hostages at Families Forum and from a lot of other people that they kind of basically said, well, the Israeli government hasn't really done much to return the hostages, so we'll let Trump and Kushner and Witkoff deal with,
come in and do it. Right.
And what's been weird to me about all of this is that you haven't really seen Netanyahu get particularly upset over that.
Maybe it's a strategic.
Maybe it was strategic. Maybe he let it happen. But now when you're looking at it and kind of working backwards and going, well, this is a decision that he made to kind of let this happen. And now Trump has, in a lot of people's opinion, thrown Israel under the bus, in terms of basically saying, I'm signing this deal, that's what's happening, Israel wasn't in the room, as you rightly said. So it's not really a good situation where this country is currently sitting. Is not very safe, not very secure, and very unclear what happens next.
I would say as well, if we zoom out even a little bit, I think a lot of times, and we hear experts say this all the time, you have to use history as evidence. Most of the time when third-party countries or a third-party country makes a decision on the behalf of another country, and we've seen this over the last 100 years, let's just think about how many times this has happened, whether it be partitioning or it be decisions that are made without another government, the actual government of the place agreeing. Yes, sometimes things work out in a specific way. Most of the time, there are intense problems that last for generations. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen now, but I think it's important to have that perspective because, again, Lebanon isn't in the room, Israel is not in the room. And one could argue, they can't be in the room because of this and they can't be in the room because of that. They are the affected parties, and the people who are affected are the people who live there.
You've got to have buy-in. You've got to have buy-in on these things. Even World War II, where Germany lost the war, what happened afterwards, there was a certain amount of buy-in, whether that was that they ran education programs to help people understand what they need to understand of what went wrong and what they should be in the future and blah, blah, blah. But in the grand scheme of things, you can't, long term, this isn't going to work. And one of the things that I think we can get into is maybe the money of what Iran is potentially going to get from this.
Right.
Because it the more you read it, the more it just looks massively both bizarre and concerning.
Like favorable, one could say, towards the Iranian regime, especially for me, on a personal note, it's specifically shocking just because, and we spoke about this in last week's episode, but there was so much death and destruction and like control over the Iranian people. Obviously, as Israelis, we suffered as well from Iranian rockets. But if you just think about even just what the IRGC did to their own people, to have that be the situation just a few months ago and then kind of have this opportunity. I mean, I don't know if we've seen something like this in decades where it's basically, and people are comparing it a little bit to like, the Obama deal, but it's so different. There's so many different things. Let's actually get like more into the details of
Sure.
of what is in there.
So, okay, we've got an immediate relief where the US is issuing a 60-day waiver allowing Iran to export oil and petrochemical products. It's the first sanctions relief since the war began. We've then got this MOU, which is what was essentially signed in Versailles, promising a $300 billion reconstruction fund backed by Gulf states. Trump later denied this. Vance has confirmed it on CBS. Trump then contradicted Vance. But it does have to be said, this has been floating around like a lot. It's not like this is just, allegedly Trump said it and then, this said it and that. No, it's been floating around a lot to the point where it seems quite likely. And the fact that the Gulf states are paying for it is really, it also adds just a small amount of confusion in the sense that multiple times various reporting has come out, even from our own paper, that has talked about the fact that actually Gulf states wanted this war to go and remove the regime. So you've kind of got to ask, and they're willing to basically help the regime continue in it.
Also, Gulf states were attacked during the war, which is also that we spoke about this so much when we were on our original episodes of the deep dive during the war. That entire thing of just attacking the Gulf states, and I know that there's so many different reasonings people gave, always sat so oddly with me.
Yeah.
And this is like the cherry on top, because it's like, okay, and despite all of that, we are going to back this funding in order to help you rebuild after you bombed us.
Right, and you've got to kind of ask what the logic is behind. You could argue that, okay, well, by paying this, it's maybe, we're giving you this if you keep your mouth shut and you don't attack us again.
It's not really a guarantee.
Yeah, it doesn't really scream, you don't give someone a reward after they do something like that, and it does very much seem like that. There's then also the $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets that are also going to be released. The Iran's ambassador immediately contradicting Vance on some of this, saying Iran alone will decide how to spend its unfrozen assets.
There are so many contradictions that it's like, I think there to confuse us.
I don't know whether it's that. I think part of it is that some of it is that the parties who are involved in these negotiations are leaking various things and are saying various things to try and basically put stuff out there in advance so that when they get to the table, it's you're negotiating past what you were already coming to negotiate, so that when you're there, you're kind of not working on the actual points you want to deal with. You're dealing with the points that have already gone out to the media that you didn't want to go out to the media. So it's shady negotiating tactics and poor negotiating tactics, but in the grand scheme of things, could potentially help those who are negotiating to be able to do that. But I think also what a lot of people who will be listening to us and hearing us talk about all of this, as you mentioned, is the amount of Iranians who have been killed. Some estimates are around 40,000 people, higher, lower, depending on who you ask and talk to. And it does very much look that even if this tiniest slither of this goes into effect and stays, that's it. It's over. And we wrote, I believe it was our news editor, Alex Winston, who wrote when the initial protests began around January of this year, that this was a Tiananmen Square moment. And there are moments like that in history where you kind of have to sort of say, this will be the turning point of it. It'll either cement itself in more so, or it will be able to be, shut down. And we kind of saw what recently happened in Hungary. I was recently in Romania and saw Ceausescu's house and learned the history of how communism happened there and how the fall of communism and what have you. And it really interested me because this is kind of one of those moments, and it does very much look like this deal is going to, for want of a better language, screw over the Iranian people for a very, very long time. And we've been talking about how, Jews and Iranians were always friends, and it very much feels like this is a cop-out on our part, because and rightly so that we are caring for our own security. At the same time, we have completely lost sight of the Iranian people.
In a way, yes, obviously putting Israeli security first, as any country would put their own security first. But the fact that Israel isn't even in the room in the talks makes it even more I don't even know what the word is. It makes it even harder to kind of process also, because on the one hand, yes, it's like, okay, maybe it's being thrown aside and that's not okay. And then what is even within Israel's control? I think a lot of times we see, especially living in Israel, there's obviously, there's pride about being Israeli, and there's a lot of things that are kind of shown as, we always know what's going on, we're always at the top of our game. And obviously October 7th was a big lesson in how that is not always the case. But I think they still try to kind of say, we always know what's going on. I feel like at this point, Israel seems to be a little bit helpless. They don't really have a say. I think something else that's really interesting is if we're thinking about what Iran gets, and it's kind of highlighting the monetary sort of rewards, however you want to name it, the monetary value in which they're going to be, whatever, with sanctions, all that kind of stuff. There was a Jerusalem Post report as well, I want to say, I believe a week ago, talking about how before this ceasefire was actually agreed, Iran was on the brink of economic collapse. And I think, obviously, money talks, it's very obvious that that's the case. We can even flip it around and think how interesting it is that Iran is willing to come to the table with the US after everything that's happened, because I do think they were probably, on the brink of complete collapse and chaos. And it's crazy how much that can rule decision making.
Yes, and I think what that gets us to is the Strait of Hormuz, because we're looking at whether or not that strait is open or closed or what have you. And one of the bits that's interesting about that is that yes, they were on the verge of economic collapse. The thing is that the world has gotten very comfortable, and I say this as someone who enjoys the comforts of the world, but we're not used to wars. We're not used to rationing. We're not used to not being able to, I don't know, go to a restaurant and get whatever we want, go to the petrol station or gas station and be able to not spend our life savings just to fill up our car. And I think the world kind of looked at that and just went, well, we don't like Trump, so we don't think this war means anything. And okay, well, we just want it to end. And if you're taking a broad view and kind of trying to understand what it really, really means, Iran knew that as soon as it got control of the Strait of Hormuz, I don't think it realized it immediately, unless it already had these in plans, but as soon as oil prices started to tick up slowly but surely, there's an element of, yes, the country may have been near economic collapse, but at the same time, they were able to use this as huge leverage.
The ball was in their court in that.
Absolutely. And they were able to basically hold the world to ransom, hold the price. The price of kerosene went up, which meant the price of flights went up, which meant also people's petrol for their cars and gas for their cars went up. So,
I mean, it's a clever move.
It's unfortunately a clever move, but at the same time, just basically means that this war has been doomed to fail from the point of view that if you're not going to have a strong stomach and go, we can weather this, we can deal with this, we can handle this. If you can't do that, of course, this is exactly what's going to happen.
And I think also what's interesting is now, obviously Trump likes to make sort of very absolute claims. The war is over, the Strait of Hormuz is open. We were seeing, even this week that there were multiple problems with the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, there were mines that were laid out that they still needed to go in and try and identify and get rid of. It's difficult and dangerous for people doing shipping routes to go through the regular routes, so they need to go through more dangerous routes in order to get to the place that they need to be. We're definitely not like, and no pun intended, but out of the water in this sense. Sorry.
Nice pun. No, we're not. We're really not, because the other element to this is that Iran is now insisting that it's retaining control of the Strait of Hormuz, something that was never Iran's. Iran never had control over this area.
It's hard for me to remember a time where like that wasn't the case.
Right, because no one thought about it. It wasn't an area that you paid any attention to. The oil came out, the whatever other products that go through there still came out, and no one cared. No one paid any attention to it. And the nonsense that Israel also, in the middle of this, randomly started turning around and there was a thing of turning around and going, well, we should have the ability to have a canal going through Israel and ship stuff through that. And it's like, we have, as a country, have changed our decision on what the hell this war was about multiple times. And it's really depressing for the people of Iran. It's really depressing for our own security now. But also from the point of view of Israel's diplomacy, Trump turning around and saying, well, no one really, wants to listen to you anymore. No one really cares about what Israel says. Netanyahu is really problematic to work with. And I think as we're heading towards elections, I wonder how much that's really playing on people's minds. Yes, Trump threw Israel under the bus, which he did, I'm really sorry to say. Unless there's some other big plan here that we really don't know, which by the way, there are some Trump supporters saying there's some plan. There's a plan to all of this. There's a reason why all of this happened. But
last week on the Deep Dive episode, we had an Iranian analyst, strategic analyst, basically say exactly that. Maybe it's some sort of ploy, but we haven't really seen that play out in the last week, I would say.
We haven't seen that play out. The Gulf Fund to reconstruct Iran doesn't seem to line up with that. Unless that means that it's going to mean Gulf reconstruction needs to be spent with Gulf countries, and that means Gulf countries can go into Iran. Potentially. We don't know. We literally don't know.
So Iran's parliament speaker said to reporters when he was leaving Switzerland, I'm going to read it out, when implementing a ceasefire and ending the war becomes difficult, we can resolve it either through missiles or through negotiations. I told Vance, we are here engaged in talks, and according to the signed understanding, there should be no threats or coercion. Yet today, your president has issued threats. Understand that we never negotiate under threats or pressure. To me, it's such an interesting contrast between that kind of statement that has been ringing through our heads, I think, for the last 20 years of like, we do not negotiate with terrorists, flipped on its head, basically saying, we as a totalitarian regime are not going to negotiate with you guys under threats. And it kind of shows like how the power has shifted.
Not only has the power shifted, but it very much showed at the beginning of this war, we heard the term paper tiger over and over and over. Iran's a paper tiger, Iran's a paper tiger. And what Trump has kind of done has not only fumbled this whole thing, but has basically the American deterrence, the Israeli deterrence that existed in this region, that Iran knew it was playing with fire. They knew as much as they were attacking us, they knew there was a danger. They had already lost Hezbollah massively in a lot of ways. The Houthis have been mysteriously quite quiet in the grand scheme of things, because I'm pretty sure they're not willing to really go.
A lot of that is due to just internal Houthi issues within.
There's a lot of those problems. But the other element to all of this is basically the small side point of the deterrence is gone. There's no.
They played with the big guys and they came out maybe hurt, but they survived. And I think that is like.
And to quote Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Honestly, something that I want to touch on really quickly is just Vance, because he's obviously been in the headlines so much this week. Interestingly, I feel like from an Israeli perspective, Vance is like bad cop a little bit, where it's like obviously, if you look at it from the perspective of an average American, why would you want your country to be at war with another country that's mainly fighting a different country that is not your country, and then you're kind of like feeling the repercussions of that? For example, with oil prices, it's dominating the headlines when there's a lot of domestic things happening within your country that, you're kind of not really thinking about, well, what's Iran doing?
From the narrow view,
Vance
it makes sense.
Is that guy, I think, who kind of like represents or at least for him, he is the person that people will look to and kind of say, okay, well, Vance is on our side. He knows what the people want. He knows what the Americans want. And I think that's kind of his role in this whole thing. Whereas Trump is kind of Trumpian about everything. Vance is much more like, nope, I'm doing what needs to be done for America. If people don't listen, and he has this very much like, what I say is what happens attitude. Like we've seen it before. When the Zelensky sort of chaos happened in the White House, that was when I saw it for the first time, at least like personally, to kind of see that like he has this kind of persona and aura where it's just like, you don't talk back to me. You don't say, what I say is what goes. And we are America. And I think a lot of people, especially Trump voters, kind of connect with that.
It has been a Republican value for a very long time that there have been Americans who are tired of America being the world's policeman, and are tired of America being in the Middle East and in other countries where it doesn't really belong, allegedly. But the thing is, if you take a very broad geopolitical view on the Middle East, and you really line everything up and you kind of, do a beautiful mind or the meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia of the guy with the yarn on the board, and you look at all of it, a lot of stuff does lead back to Iran. And you could argue that by removing the Iranian regime, you solve a few different problems. You solve the price of oil, because having a friendly Iranian state that would potentially be led by the Shah, the Shah's son, whoever else it could be led by potentially, and you then solve that problem. You then essentially solve Hezbollah as a problem. You then essentially solve Israel as being a dependent country on America problem as well, which is something that there are Republicans leaning right, quite hard right, who really don't like that. And then you go very left in America, they also don't really like that. You could solve a lot of problems by genuinely doing this war properly.
But I think a lot of times it's very hard to think in the long term when you are the person or party who is suffering or who is feeling some sort of decrease of your quality of life. And I think
decreasing your quality of life, but also for voters.
Right, exactly.
And if you are, this was an op-ed that I wrote actually near the beginning of the war, where I basically said it's really weird that Arab countries are not being much more, involved in this war, because they don't have democracy as a problem. They don't need to think of their voters. Sure, they need to keep their people happy, but it's really, really odd that America, the country that would be the least likely to fought this war, yet all the Arab countries that have suffered under Iran didn't really fight this war. And essentially going back to Vance, he's done a few different things here. Yes, he's gone in and taken the views, as you said, but he's also doing a thing that Trump likes to do, is find Vance to be the fall guy. And Vance has shown up in various places where things have not gone to plan, and Trump is able to be gone, it's Vance's problem.
I think to Vance's credit, he actually is able to handle himself quite well under like situations that seem to be, he can be critiqued very, very heavily. And I think he has like a steadfast sort of, and I'm not saying I'm for him or against him, but I do think that his ability to do that is pretty strong. And again, I think people look to him, especially people who are already Republican and, they support the party. They look at him and they see somebody who is willing to stand and say something that might be a little bit against the stream or against what people have been doing in order for the American people to kind of thrive and prosper. So it's an interesting kind of thing, but I don't think it makes him popular within the eyes of the Israelis.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't think he's loved by Israel in any way, shape or form. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because he's going to be the face of these negotiations. He's going to be the one there. Trump is going to take the credit when he can take the credit. He's weirdly been somewhat more quiet about it, if it's not
a little bit, but also like when he has been talking, it's been massively problematic. Like when he started posting on Truth Social during the talks, and then the Iranian delegation walked out because they felt threatened, and it's so interesting that this is like real life and real life politics, and that's how it's playing out. Somebody posts on social media, and that somebody is the president of the United States, and it can have such a ripple effect so quickly. Like that's the modern world.
That is the modern world, and the question, it basically is, where are these negotiations going in terms of, is this really a non-starter, which I think a lot of people in the back of their minds are kind of going, this really is a non-starter, so how's that going to even happen? But if it does go ahead, and it does happen, we are setting ourselves up for a future war with Iran. The hardliners are still in power. The chest beating and rhetoric against Israel, against the United States,
It's going to be stronger.
It is slowly but surely ramping up ever so slightly. During the negotiations, it's still happening, but it's been more
They have
calibrated.
to show that they're a little bit more, cooperative in this time.
They have to show that, but they're still, keeping their base inside Iran happy and making those noises. So long term, there will be another war with Iran if this negotiation goes the way it goes. But either way, unless the regime somehow magically calms down and decides that it wants to just look after its own people and build Iran into a normal functioning state, which is not going to happen, just to be clear, it's a very interesting question on what happens next.
Okay, so moving on, we're both British.
We're both
Mancunian.
Well, I mean, you weren't born in Manchester.
I wasn't, but I grew up there.
You very much grew up there. So for us, we're very much people who kind of know Andy Burnham a little bit.
A little bit.
I left before he became mayor of Manchester, but I think both of us have seen some of the changes he's brought to Manchester.
Yes.
He's very obsessed with public transportation, which, for the record, Manchester had huge transportation problems, which is completely...
I love that this is how this started.
because Manchester had huge transportation problems, and he did a good job of sorting that out. He really did.
And the context of this is that Prime Minister Keir Starmer resigned this week. I think it's interesting because in a way it's a surprise and in a way it's not surprising at all. I think it happened relatively quickly from when the rumors started kind of coming out that wow, he is going to resign, and it just kind of happened the next day or the next following days. But I mean, there's been talks about his own party losing confidence in him for a long time.
Right.
And, he's a divisive character. And I think that, he kind of came in a bravado kind of way of, we're going to make lots of changes and so much is going to happen. And we could focus on a lot of internal British politics, but I think...
to his credit, he did say when he started that change is going to be slow and you're not going to necessarily see it. And that's the thing. It's true. Change has not been seen. The UK did grow economically. The GDP, I believe, has been doing better than various estimations came out. So from that point of view, he's not been a horrendous prime minister. What he has been for this region and for other parts of the world, which is where we are actually paying attention to because we're in Jerusalem and, we follow what goes on in Israel and the Jewish world and the Middle East. He's been a bit of a wet tea towel in the sense that he's not really decided where he wants to go and what he wants to do, and hasn't really, because from the left point of view, why hasn't he called what happened in Gaza a genocide? And from the right point of view, well, he's not gone hard enough to support what needs to be supported in terms of, allowing Trump to use whatever bases it may be or other elements like that. So he's been very flip-floppy, but also been more right-wing than the traditional Labour voter would want.
I think also there's an appeasement aspect to his stance. This is a personal view of mine, but I think you want to make everybody so happy that you end up kind of not standing for anything because you're trying to kind of get it right every single time instead of saying these are my policies and this is what I'm going to do. I'm very hardline on this. Not that you have to be a hardliner, but it's just... I think I think what you said is accurate. It's I don't think I really saw him stand up. And I think that, I guess it was seen by others, also the British public anyway, are having so many internal issues that I think it's very easy to look at the head and say, it's all your fault.
Yeah.
He also basically inherited a Labour Party, and I'm sure we talk about this from, our backgrounds, where we've come from. The Labour Party has a sort of name for itself as being anti-Semitic. There's been many different claims, many different inquiries. I guess also after obviously Jeremy Corbyn, Starmer wanted to kind of not be that. But there's a lot of arguments, especially with all the anti-Semitic incidents that have happened in England over even the last few months. They don't think that he has a strong enough stance and that he hasn't had a strong enough stance. And people could argue, that's why these things continue to happen.
Well, this is one of those interesting elements is that, because I've been paying attention to it, is that people are very upset that Palestine Action was designated a terrorist organization, which meant that there have been these scenes where there were teachers and priests and other people of relatively good standing basically being dragged off the streets by policemen, which is a really weird thing to see when you don't fully, because people people struggle with nuance these days, really, really struggle with nuance to understand you can support Palestinian self-determination, some form of two-state solution that doesn't encroach on Israeli security without needing to support Hamas and Hezbollah and the PLO and PFLP and other actual terrorists. You can do it. Is possible. It is absolutely possible. And that's the failure in these things. These marches have been described as hate marches when the pro-Palestinian marches have gone on in Manchester, but without that nuance, because people will turn and go, these are hateful marches and these are racist marches and these are other words you want to just throw in there. But if you aren't looking at it from a point of view and clearly saying, if you're chanting from the river to the sea and you are actually chanting other various or globalize the Intifada, and those are what you're standing for in those kind of marches, then that is exactly why Keir Starmer has not been strong enough. That is exactly why Andy Burnham has also not been strong enough. But even the protests in Manchester, those things have been said in there. And there was after the synagogue attack at the Heaton Park Hebrew congregation in Manchester, there was a call for that week for it to be paused. I believe it was paused that week. But there's
I actually think one of them went ahead.
I believe part of it did go ahead, but I believe there was the calls for it to at least be, and I think it was at least a bit quieter. But this is the whole thing, is that people cannot do that level of nuance where you are able to actually go, these elements are what makes it problematic. And that's the whole thing about Palestine Action as well, is that he's banned this organization, and in some ways rightly so, because they have also done criminal damage in various places, which was completely unacceptable. You can't just walk into an RAF Air Force base and go and destroy damaged planes or vandalized planes. That doesn't work like that. And this is part of the problem with this, is that there's here, as you said, him trying to do everything to make everyone happy doesn't really mean he stands for anything, because it's nuanced. It's a nuanced conversation that he was terrible at explaining, but people are also terrible at taking a moment to have a nuanced view on this subject. And it's very often a view that is not able to actually understand what the particulars are that would actually solve the problem. For the Jewish people living in the UK, you call it a hate-filled march. For the non-Jewish people in the UK, or even whatever ethnicity you are who are going on these marches, are failing to understand why it's problematic. And there are probably some people who do actually want to globalize the Intifada and do actually want from the river to the sea and want all those things, and that's why they're actually saying those things. But we also see videos online, to what scale we don't know, but you do see people when you turn and go, do you understand what that actually means? And you explain it to them and they kind of go, oh, actually I didn't get that. And then the complexities around the world continue as we look at anti-Semitism. There are a lot of these incidents that are happening that go under the radar because they're not big enough, because they don't make enough noise.
Or a bigger thing happens and they kind of just
that go by the wayside. So what else did happen this week that's important to hear about?
It spanned across multiple continents. There was something in Berlin on Saturday, June 21st. A 31-year-old man was arrested. And then the man who he was following confronted him and was punched in the face by this person. So it's sad because that in itself is like a smaller kind of incident, but at the same time, it's absolutely not. Somebody was just somebody was in the street, just being in the street. It's 2026, punched in the face for being a Jewish person. And I think that is the danger of where we're at, and it's hard for people to grasp because Israel and Judaism are so intertwined with one another that it's really hard for people to look at anti-Semitism just as like a Jewish issue. And I think these kinds of incidents, for me, it's striking that no, but there could just be somebody there, they look a bit Jewish, that's a problem for someone. And maybe, yes, you can hide behind the fact that it's a political thing or it's an ideal thing, but at the end of the day, you're punching someone because they're a Jewish person.
Right, and it goes back a little bit to the nuance thing where you kind of, because people don't understand what has happened here and what has gone on here, people genuinely believe that this country committed a deliberate act of genocide on the people of Gaza, and that all of the people who are Jewish, who support Israel, who believe Israel has a right to exist, supported all of the things that happened in Gaza. Not everything that happened in Gaza was perfect. Not everything that happened in Gaza should have happened. Some of it should, some of it shouldn't. But in the grand scheme of things, because of that inability to have that conversation, that inability to understand, Israel has been written off as this pariah state. Anyone who supports it is now in this kind of situation. And I think a lot of people will turn around and say, well, anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism and it has no connection and it doesn't matter and it's thing. And I think a lot of the time people are failing to look deeper and try and understand why people are feeling like this and are going out and doing these attacks. Yes, they shouldn't be doing these attacks, and yes, it comes from a hateful place, and they probably would have done it anyway. Maybe, very likely, people who are gonna go off and punch someone in the face for being Jewish,
They'll figure out another reason to do it.
they'll figure out another reason.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a very complex and controversial war to go off and do that.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there is a climate of Jews are bad people for supporting all of this, and that inability to have nuanced conversations, that inability to do that, and the inability to have a government that's able to put money and resources in the right place to explain itself as well, also is leading to these kinds of problems where if you as a country are not really explaining why you're doing what you're doing and you're sort of saying right-wing things, it doesn't help.
Right.
Doesn't and I know it's going to be an unpopular thing to say. Lots of things add to something. It doesn't mean they are the root cause of it. Anti-Semitism is still anti-Semitism. It's the oldest form of hatred. It has the problems that it has always had. People have always found excuses. That doesn't mean that other things are not adding to it.
Right. If we move now also to the Netherlands, which, by the way, has just kind of been a breeding ground for anti-Semitic incidents over the last year and obviously in the past.
Right.
So Dutch authorities arrested a 20-year-old man planning to bomb or set fire to a synagogue near Haarlem, which, I mean...
Side point is why Harlem in the US, in New York, is called Harlem, just by the way, but that's not the point.
So prosecutors say that he had a terrorist motive. And, you know, it's just adding to the list of things that we're seeing happening to synagogues. I mean, you mentioned before the Heaton Park synagogue incident.
But there's been incidents in London. There have been incidents in Greece. There have been incidents in Baltic countries, across Europe. And there are two elements of things going on here. There's just plain anti-Semitism that has been, as I said, brought on by the climate that it is. There's also what Iran is funding. There is a new organization which escapes my name, the name of which escapes me. But Iran is also funding some of these incidents, both targeting Israeli organizations or also targeting Jewish organizations or Jewish buildings or Jewish cultural centers. And this is an ongoing problem where countries are not necessarily dealing with this. In recent weeks, they have gone towards Iran and said, you need to stop doing this. Iran is probably not going to listen. But at the same time, it then kind of brings us to Canada in terms of what happened this week, which was a much bigger incident where having an active shooter situation is maybe common, unfortunately, in the US and something we hear about all the time. Active shooter situation in Canada is something very much different. We have had some in recent years. They have happened before, but this one was deliberately in a Jewish neighborhood.
Can you walk us through the details?
So what we know is that there was a rabbi who was of the local Chabad, Rabbi Michael Moshe Mizrahi. He may have been hit in the crossfire, was what Israeli media said earlier on in the week. We had reports of 20 to 30 shots in the heavily Jewish area. Schools were locked down during this. Businesses were locked down during this as well. And they're believed to have been a manifesto that the shooter published before all of this. Now, some of this will be old by the time that the people who are watching and listening to this thing, so you can go and look up the very latest on that. But it does speak to this ongoing problem within Western society or even in more anglicized countries that are facing these sorts of problems, and where it goes from here, if it is not shut down, it's only going to get worse, because if the definition of what is anti-Semitic is not fully brought on board by people and is not shut down at the moment that it's being said, such as the hate marches in the UK, which are hate marches for various reasons, if those things are not dealt with properly, if they are not stamped out, Jews are going to be used as the scapegoat, and the climate of, oh, well, it's acceptable to do this to Jews because of X reason.
All the things the Jews do.
All the things the Jews do. But in the grand scheme of things, these are things that need to be dealt with by people who are in charge, because at the end of the day, it's not good to have a society where certain minorities are treated like this in any way, shape or form.
I think like it's important to even just pull it back all the way for, let's say, even in the last century, not only talking about Jews, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, civil rights, all of these things. There have been so many efforts in order for people who, let's say I'll use myself as an example, you're an average person living, the average life. You wake up one day, you're trying your best, you want to do what everybody does in a normal world on a normal day. There's no reason why I or somebody next to me, whatever ethnicity they are, however they look, whatever challenges they come with, there's no reason why we can't leave our house and then come back safely at the end of the day. There is no reason for that. And if there is something that is creating that situation and making that happen where people are not safe for a wide range of things, whether it be that they're Israeli, whether they're Palestinian, whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they're from here, whether they're from there, it's a problem. It's a huge problem. And we need to not only understand the deep root of it and where it is coming from and how to sort of educate a little bit better in order to make, you can disagree with people. You can say, I really don't like the actions of this country. I really don't like how the stuff that I even feel like, okay, there's things in the Jewish world that I don't think are okay. It should never, ever get to the point in which violence is the answer, in which you think that it is okay to degrade or hurt or harm somebody else just because of your way of thinking. And like, that's such a basic concept that we are completely missing. I think so many people in the world now completely desensitized to the fact that that's like a core value and should be in like the modern world.
Sure. But it's more than that. It's that leadership in countries around the world need to deal with difficult subjects. And I think part of it is this inability to recognize that leaders are constantly in election cycles. So saying the more difficult things are sometimes hard to say, because if you say it wrong, you screw your leadership, your chance of ever doing well in the next election. Sure, fine, whatever. But it's worse than that, because if you are not dealing with these problems properly and you're not stamping out actual forms of racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, list goes on. If you're not dealing with those problems properly, they are only going to get worse, and you're only going to end up with a society that has problems. You have to deal with these problems. You have to tackle them with a zero tolerance. And by zero tolerance, I mean actually zero tolerance, not saying it and not actually doing anything. Because in the UK...
Don't be a wet tea towel, as you said.
Don't be a wet tea towel. And Keir Starmer has said we have zero tolerance. What, does zero tolerance mean that you don't quite deal with the problem, but kind of sort of pretend that you do? No, you have to get involved. You have to get your hands dirty. It means you're going to actually say something that's not going to be popular in some ways.
Goes back to the appeasement thing. You're not going to please everyone, but there are specific values, and this obviously is my opinion, but there are specific things that, it's not about pleasing people. It's about the greater good.
Look, and I think what's interesting about all of that is, as Israel now heads to elections, there is going to be a lot of divisiveness here as well. There is, I think that also pivots us quite nicely to actually that, because the elections have kind of gone a bit quiet, weirdly. We know the elections are on the horizon.
Well, the Iran-US talks were like so much in the spotlight, like nothing else.
In a weird way, half brought everyone together and half didn't, because everyone kind of went, wow, this is terrible for our security, this is terrible for Israel's future. Then the political mudslinging began, and everyone began sort of picking up a piece to beat everyone else with.
Right.
But over the coming weeks and months, even, we're going to basically watch what happens next, because there are serious problems within Israeli society. Arab crime has not been resolved by any way, shape, or form.
Socioeconomic issues are also. It's been difficult for a long time. I think the war hasn't helped. But again, Israel usually is a country, especially in the election cycle, which will always put defense first. Right. Usually we will notice that there is some sort of defense crisis right before or, in the months leading up to an election in order for, in my opinion, it is in order to bolster up whoever the current leader is, and people will take advantage of those things. And yes, and like you can look at it just from a factual standpoint. Most of the times when things happen, it is close to an election cycle. You might also say that there's always an election cycle, so whenever something happens, it's close by anyway, because there's so many elections.
You could wonder, one could wonder really, if Trump has done what he's done to go through the motions on this deal, keep it moving just long enough to get us through the elections where Israel's hands are basically tied. It can't really have another war right now, and all we have to do is go through an election cycle without having one of those situations. And one has to wonder, if Israel does go through an election cycle with that, what are the results going to be? Who's going to end up on top out of that?
I'm very curious. I don't know.
We're going to find out. We're going to see the latest polls that normally come out on a Sunday, so keep your eyes out for that. But as that does come out, we are basically going to find out where we're heading as a country. And I think a lot of people, Likud and Netanyahu are still doing reasonably well in these polls. But the question basically remains is, when it comes down to the final actual vote, how are people really going to vote? Are the Haredi parties that have traditionally gone with Netanyahu still going to be happy to do that? Are they going to make some deal with someone else to change that? Less likely. But the right-wing parties also will not get into anywhere near power without Netanyahu helping them. And that's basically sort of where we're at from that point of view. And it long term, I think Naftali Bennett rather has been saying recently to us and to some other English outlets in Israel that there won't really be much of a country if Netanyahu wins the next election, which has been his argument for that.
You have to wonder also whether that's being said because that's a great political line, or whether it's something that is actually
no. But you do have to look at various things, whether that's judicial reform, whether that's just basically reforming the media, and if Cannes vanishes, Israel will not be in Eurovision again, which is something that people don't talk about enough. I enjoy the fact that we do get to go to Eurovision. It's nice. But long term, these are what's going to be asked over the coming weeks, and something that we'll be covering as the Jerusalem Post, but also people will be looking at from around the world, and we'll have to wait and see.
The final thing that I want to kind of get your opinion on, and I want to kind of touch on this briefly, but I think it would be crazy if we wouldn't speak about it. Going all the way back to Trump and Iran and the Middle East, Trump said this week that Syria could be kind of like a leading party in dealing with the Hezbollah issue. Now, I think I don't even know how to.
Well, look, there's a lot to this. There's a lot to this because what a lot of people don't realize and a lot of people don't remember is that Syria occupied parts of Lebanon for a very long time way back when. And it took a very long time to get them out. So I think there will be Lebanese kind of going, we've been down this road. It didn't go so great for us. We're not necessarily wanting to do this again.
And this is like not a verbatim quote, but saying something like, if Israel can't do the job without killing everybody, then let's let Syria do it. You're saying that about the country that
is your ally, allegedly.
Not even that. They like Syria, and I know it's a different leadership now.
Right.
However, Syria doesn't have the best track record in how they do or do not kill people, whether it's okay or not.
And from our own reporting of Danielle Grayman-Kennard earlier on this week, where she was pointing out that there has been, in the past year, where Syria's not really been, it's been 2 years since that took place, if I'm remembering correctly, but there's been violence, there have been various other bits and pieces in terms of criminal things going on there that have not been being dealt with, and there's a lot of appeasement and that sort of thing under the current leadership. So to turn and kind of go, oh, we're going to let them do this
it almost feels like a joke.
It almost feels like a joke in one way, but it almost in another way is kind of, it's this thought process of, well, we'll let the Middle East solve its own problems, which isn't really working when you've kind of in the middle of a deal where you're kind of giving the side that is causing the most problems in the Middle East a lot of leeway.
Something is shady or fishy or something, I'll say it differently, something makes my guard go up when I hear these things. I do not know. If you would have told me 10 years ago, that would have been something that Trump would have said. And I know that Trump says outrageous things and we can never predict what he was going to say. But I would never have been able to predict that. I would never have thought it would have happened.
All of this comes on the same week or days where Trump has just unveiled a new Air Force One that was gifted by Qatar. And you've got to really wonder what that really means. Because I'm not saying that Trump has been bought by them. I'm not saying that Trump is listening to them or anything like that, because we simply don't know. And I'm not.
It's questions that we would ask.
Bad, to quote Kalev Ben-David, who sat in exactly this seat earlier on this week, it is bad optics.
It really is. And I think they're questions that we have to ask. And the answers could be, no, this is just, but I mean, if you are using critical thinking skills, something seems off with it. And I think it's important not to look away and not to say, oh, but it's just this.
No, but and I think what people are going to ask when we're saying these things, and you're going to be listening to us and kind of sitting there and going, oh, well, what are they talking about and what are they saying? It's not that we're saying that this is definitely what's happening. It's that we are applying critical thinking to this. It's that you are looking at all of the different pieces and you're trying to work out what's moving, because we can hear what we can hear through the reports that get leaked. We can see from all the various reporting what seems to be happening and try and draw a conclusion from it. But what's important about when you are reading the news and when you are trying to understand the news is that you have to look to all the different parts to try and understand what's going on, because we will never know what goes on behind closed doors in Washington. We will never fully know the full conversations. We will get as much reporting as we possibly can through whatever outlet is able to get it. But in short, there's never a simple of we need to blindly trust or not look into or not apply critical thinking, because at this point now, people are very blindsided by what happened with this Iran deal. People are asking a lot of questions. People are calling Trump names. What I noticed when I got back in this country, I've seen a lot of, have you seen that flag that's half the American flag, half the Israeli flag? I've seen that in a lot of places here, that it was not here before I left. And I've been looking at that and I've been kind of going, it's a really, really weird, very fast sort of neck-bracing U-turn that we are suddenly going back to.
We are really at, and I guess we could say this every week, but because so much is changing all the time and there's so many moving parts, we're at this sort of like, we're always at a crossroads. It's always like, okay, and then we will see what happens next in order for the chain of events to continue. And I know that's just life and it's how it works. Yeah. But it really feels it this week because there's so much happening. It's kind of transitional in a lot of ways, whether it's Keir Starmer stepping down to the Iran-US deal. Things are changing. We're going to have to see what happens, and we're going to have to do our best to, as you said, apply critical thinking in the times that matters the most, and also to bring the most updated and accurate news that we can. Right.
And so from that point of view, keep paying attention to what we're publishing from the Jerusalem Post.
Yes.
And at the same time, pay attention to, and I don't want to say it like this, but pay attention to lots of different outlets, because you're going to see things from other places that help you understand the picture more. And we're going to give you everything that we possibly can, but it's important to read everything with a critical eye.
I agree, 100%. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. And I'm so happy that we got to do this face-to-face, and it was a fascinating conversation with you.
It was lovely to have a conversation as well. It's nice to be back in this country, which is very hot at the moment. So
very hot.
Really not pleasant from that point of view.
From Europe to here is like...
No, I loved how cold it was. But Jacob Blasnick is back next week.
He is. Very exciting. We've missed Jake.
And it'll be good to have him back. So you'll see him next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you again next week. In the meantime, for the latest updates, news and analysis on Israel, the Middle East, and Jews around the world, head to JPost.com.